descendants on board. You are on a, what's that, 20-foot by 50-foot screen? So you are, right, so Victoria, at the moment we're seeing you and your absolutely amazing paintings. So, can I introduce you all to the descendants group, the descendants discussion group, okay? The wives and widows, obviously, we got very emotional with this one. We're expecting this one to get a bit more rowdy and angry, more than anything else. Who laughed there? There was a laugh from there. But this is to show, and this is our last discussion group before we go on to a few other things, to talk about the effects that it's having on the descendants. Okay, so I'm a descendant myself. I'm the son. We do have Laura, who is a granddaughter. And I believe everybody else is a same as me, son or daughter. Yeah. And we also have Karina Lester joining us from Australia. Whose father, Yemi Lester, was a massive campaigner for the testing programme. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca and then you've got the biggest group for Rebecca, I'm afraid. Just so you can let people introduce yourself. We do have a big group. So for your introduction, you can keep it quite short. We do have quite a bit of time, but we just wanted to tell everybody that there is quite a large group, so make sure you can get your voice heard in the time frame. Okay? So over to you, Rebecca. Sorry.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Now, we've had a really emotional set of sessions already today, and the one just before this one was the wives and widows group that I think probably brought a lump to many of our throats. And one of the things that struck me from both the veterans session and the widows and wives session is that often it was very painful for nuclear testing veterans to even speak to their children or wives about what they went through. And with the government not admitting to there being a problem, not admitting to testing taking place, and not admitting to the medical conditions that veterans and their wider family were subjected to, I think it's often left a lot of the descendants confused and asking questions, and there are many descendants out there who may be suffering, who don't even know that there's a causal link to what happened to their grandparents or great-grandparents, and hopefully this session will shed a bit of light and start to answer some of those questions. So without further ado, I want to go through the brilliant selection of descendants that you've got in front of you today, some who I already know and some who I'm getting to know as the day progresses. We've got one champion kickboxer sitting next to me here, so don't mess with her, but you'll hear a little bit more from her in a minute. So starting at the very end with Liz or Elizabeth is your more formal name.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Bacon. I'm the daughter of John Morris, the veteran who was up on the stage earlier. I'm one of 4 children of Betty and John Morris, the 3 of whom have survived. I'm the middle one. And I've been on a journey with, as a child, learning about an exciting place called Christmas Island. How cool is that? Having a cool daddy collecting coconuts, to then going on my own learning journey and my own political awareness of the effects of radiation and the campaign that the nuclear veterans have had, to the point where we're at now, which has moved on at such a pace, and just to represent here alongside Laura our family and how we are going to continue to fight this.
Next we've got Laura.
Hi, my name's Laura Morris. I'm Elizabeth's niece. I'm the granddaughter of John Morris, as she said, the veteran that was up earlier. I'm also very lucky to have Rebecca as my MP. Contacted Rebecca and Charlie and the team in December 2020 and have then since really been working with them and Alan and the LABRATS team and proudly campaigning alongside my grandpa and the rest of the nuclear community.
Thanks, and we've got Anne. Anne's the champion kickboxer, and her dad's really proud of her because he's been telling me all day. World champion kickboxer.
Hello everybody, I'm Anne. Obviously you've listened to my dad too today, so I know about his experiences. I was born in 1963, and like the other speakers, I learned about Christmas Island. You know, to a child, Christmas Island is something magical. And obviously, as time's gone on, I've learned what horrible things happened there. So yeah, and I've helped my dad over the last few years or so, trying to campaign for recognition and a medal.
Thanks, Anne. To my left, I've got the lovely Suzanne.
Hello, my father was James Eads, and he served with Operation Grapple on Christmas Island. My account is quite desperately different to others because my mother tried to guide us that my father just was never to speak about it. You weren't allowed to talk about it. Even if you caught crabs on your summer holiday, you weren't allowed to show him, you weren't allowed to do all sorts of things. And looking back today with hindsight, I think he had PTSD, but at that time, nothing was known about it. I was born in 1963. My father ended up ill at quite a young age, and in his late 30s, early 40s, had to take early retirement, and my mother died when I was young as well. So that's part of our complicated nuclear story.
Thanks, Suzanne. And then we've got the lovely Steve, who I know very well.
Hi, I'm Steve Hurst, son of David Hurst, who was at Maralinga. He was present at the minor trials, which were arguably some of the more deadly ones, where they were blowing up plutonium. I was born in 1973 with an obvious difference. I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time as an adult talking to my dad on our trips away about his time at Maralinga, so I know quite a lot about him. Never got around to discussing whether he thought I was a result of that, but I kind of made the link through going through connections that I've made on the internet with LABRATS. And yeah, there is a link. And yeah, that's me really.
Thanks. And next we've got Sarah.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, I'm Sarah, also commonly known as SJ because I'm a Sarah Jane. My dad was Tony Butler. He was in Christmas Island for Grapple X and Grapple Y. He passed away in 2009 from cancer of unknown origin. And growing up, I was always aware of Christmas Island. He had lots of quite nice stories to tell about things that he'd got up to. Some also really fascinating things about what he'd witnessed and what he'd seen. And one of his biggest concerns was what effect Christmas Island was having on me, my brother, and his grandson. I'd suffered a lot with infertility and multiple miscarriages. My son has some disabilities, and I have a number myself, so one of his main interests was kind of trying to pursue, you know, it's the pursuit of knowledge to find out, you know, what's down to Christmas Island, what's not, what can be done about it. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell-ish.
Lovely, thanks very much. And next we've got Laura.
Yeah, hello, my name's Laura Jackson. My father was James Owen. He was on Christmas Island in 61-62. He witnessed the 24 bombs of Dominic, which were blasted in 78 days. Unfortunately, my father died very, very young. He died in 1994. Unbeknown to me and Alan, we knew we went to Christmas Island. As a child, we thought that was quite funny that he'd been to this island called Christmas Island. But unfortunately, he died and he never, ever spoke any more of it. And obviously, we couldn't ask him any questions because he passed away. I am one of 3, but unfortunately, it's only me and myself and Alan that are alive. We lost our brother as well a year after we lost our father.
Thanks very much. And then last but no means least, Susan.
Hello, as most of you know, I'm Susan Musselwhite, daughter of Derek Musselwhite. I've got a bit of a different story, as my father walked out and left my sister and my mum and I when I was young. What you would call it now is probably PTSD, but I didn't really find out about the nuclear test until my health started to deteriorate. And then I got heavily involved without them. We started LABRATS.
Oh, thanks very much, Susan. We'll come back in a few moments to kind of go into a little bit more detail about people's experiences and how they started to rationalise and understand the things that might have been happening to them and what help might have been out there. But before we do that, I'd like to take things international and now go across the pond to our first US descendant, Kathy Sinai. Kathy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fantastic, Kathy. You've been beamed live to, I'd like to say sunny Manchester, but it's not very sunny very often. But you've been beamed to Manchester at the moment on a giant screen. You look beautiful. And we'd just like to hear a little bit about your story, Kathy, if that's okay.
Sure. My father was at Operation Hardtack in 1958. He was on the USS Renville, and I was his firstborn in 1968 after multiple miscarriages. My mother couldn't even celebrate my first child with me until after the 7th month because she had such strong feelings about childbirth and miscarriage. And my father didn't talk to me about it until in the 2000s when I talked to him about one of my coworkers was at Nagasaki as a child, and one of my customers, I was a hairdresser, and one of my customers was Bob Costello, and he was a scientist that in the Manhattan Project. Wow. And it was this strange dichotomy of the scientist who built the bomb, a victim of the bomb, and the descendant of the bomb. And it was just, and then it led to all of this other interest and research and meeting my friend Victoria and a life of advocacy. And that's our story. But my father doesn't talk about it. Maybe 2 stories.
Thanks, Kathy. Wow, that's such a story. I mean, all of those different people involved with various different stories to tell in the same room at the same time. If only we had them all here today, I think that would certainly be an interesting session. Moving on to our other, your US descendant, your friend, Victoria. Can we go across to Victoria?
Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here today and share these stories that have been silenced for so long. This painting, the waiting room, my story is unique in that my father was at somewhere between 27 and 35 class. He was on a command ship in the Pacific Proving Ground. I was told at age 12 I was an atomic child when I had my first menses. I was in a need-to-know position. And for the next 18 years, I lived in an atomic wonderland of silence, doctors, drugs. They put me on birth control pills immediately at age 12 so I wouldn't reproduce in 1968 in San Francisco. I had a full hysterectomy at 23, and he was a lab rat for the government his entire life. We lived at least 7 cancers. And I was told at age 12 that my body would track like his. So I had the good fortune to expect all of the same cancers. I'm 65 now. I've been on my deathbed twice, and Kathy And I met when she heard my story and reached out to President Obama, and who responded directly, who assigned a gentleman at the head of VA to assist me as I lay in a hospital bed in Stamford. And they came back and said that there was no program or initiative that they could find fit me in. And that's when my advocacy and activism started. Fortunately, by the grace of one doctor, Stanford abandoned me hospice in 2017. And one doctor is the reason I'm here today, to tell the story and to paint things that forever will shine a light on this.
Thanks,
That's my
Victoria.
story, and look forward to more of it, because more is going to be coming out.
Excellent. Thanks, Victoria. You've got some amazing pictures in the background there. And I have to say, from somebody kind of looking outside in, the story that you've told, and certainly the story that I've heard from many of the descendants, it's like a science fiction film, but this has been happening for decades. And it's about time the world hears, the terrible stories that people have got to tell. We've also got another descendant online, Karina, who is here to tell the story of those people who were already living in those areas that were affected by nuclear testing. Karina, are you online? Can you hear me?
I am, and I can hear you.
Oh,
good morning,
fantastic.
everyone from Australia.
Thanks so much for speaking to us, Karina.
2:30 in the morning here, so
Oh, you're a legend.
coming in live from.
You are a legend.
Look, I'm really moved by Kathy's story and Victoria's story. I'm a second generation survivor, and my late father, Yami Lester, was exposed to the British testing on mainland Australia at a location called Emu Junction, or Emu yes, and our traditional lands were the testing grounds of the British nuclear tests. As I mentioned, the first mainland was at the Emu Fields, and the location where I'm coming from is the very location where my late father felt the ground shake and this black mist roll over the main community, and many of his people were impacted, and he himself lost his sight from those tests and never had the opportunity to see his 3 children, but also see his 12 grandchildren as well. So his world went into darkness, and he lived with that. He spoke a little bit of how it impacted hugely on Aboriginal people, Indigenous Australians and his people, which is part of the Western Desert block called Bidjandara and Yambundara people of the South Australian region. And he spoke up really strongly, which led to the Royal Commission into the British nuclear test in 1985. And that's the test that, or the Royal Commission that exposed, I guess, what happened not only to Aboriginal people, but also to the ex-servicemen and women who travelled from over there to various locations in Australia, and the ones that we often speak about are Montebello Islands, Emu Fields and Maralinga. And they were traditional lands of Bidjandara Yambundara people, and those lands were used for our cultural connect, for our spiritual connection to our country, and that is what these tests took away from many of our Aboriginal people. And I'm the 3rd child born to my late father, Yami Lester. Today it's just my older brother and I. I lost my sister in May 2021, at the age of 51 with an autoimmune disease. So many of us are still suffering from what happened back then in 1953. So we continue to keep that story alive and speak up on behalf of our Aboriginal people in South Australia.
Thanks so much, Karina. That's really open and honest of you. Really appreciate that. We'll be back to you in a few moments, if that's okay. And Victoria and Kathy, I'm just going to have a few words with everyone who's sat on the stage with me now. One of the things that I always get very angry about is that there's never been a study or a public inquiry into the effects of these nuclear tests. Not just on veterans, but on their wives and their descendants and wider families. And it's dismissed time and time again that any medical condition that a descendant might have, there's no causal link to it being, linked directly to nuclear tests at all, when it's quite obvious that many of the medical conditions that I've read about that descendants have faced, there's a common theme, and they all tend to be very, very much linked to radiation exposure from the parents that were there at the sites themselves. So if descendants feel kind of okay, and this is a difficult thing to talk about, I appreciate that, but if you feel happy to explain what you might have been through yourself or various members of your families or people that you know have been affected in this way, how have they been affected? What support has actually been and made available from government? And what would you like to see change in the future? So a lot of big open questions there for everybody. And if you want to chip in, just kind of wave at me and I'll bring you in. I don't want to put anyone on the end. Susan on the end.
Myself, I've got 3 autoimmune diseases. I've also got hypothyroidism, Graves' disease, which is an autoimmune disease, which I've also got thyroid eye disease. But I've actually got it for the 2nd time, which is extremely rare, even my consultants, like, I knew you were going to be bothered when I first met you. But I was also born with something called Duane syndrome, which Marion spoke of earlier, which again, it was when I was a kid, it was brushed off as just, oh, it's a lazy eye. But it's not. It's a lot more complex. It's a lot more draining to the eyes. And with having then thyroid eye disease has made the Duane syndrome worse. But I've also got a lot of other health issues that they can't explain why. I always get, I don't know. And when I explain that, this is, I can reel off a load of symptoms and they go, it could be anything, or they'll go, it's the Graves' disease. It's always, there's an excuse, or it's, I don't know. And that's my issue that I always have. And there's no support. When you say that your father was at the nuclear tests, it's brushed off. I know of a descendant as well, when she said that her father was at the nuclear tests, the doctor turned around and said to her, shall we turn the lights out and see if you glow in the dark?
That's terrible.
Now, from a medical professional, that's not exactly what somebody wants to hear, because you want comfort, you want knowledge of what's wrong with you, you want someone to understand that you're going through this pain and suffering constantly, but there's always a door closed in front of you and you're never listened to, and there's just no support. The only support we have is us. That's it. It's our community that is our support network.
Myself, I was born blind in one eye, and I do have loss of sight in the other eye as well. I've also lost my teeth. My teeth just never grew properly or just fell out. And I also have tumours removed, cancer tumours. Everything that affected me affected my face or area, my head.
Yeah.
And I also was born with a bad heart. I had a heart attack when I was 42 years old, which my older brother, who's now passed away, he actually did die of ischemic heart disease at the age of 31. He was also poorly, anything, glandular fever, he had everything. I've had miscarriages. I couldn't carry my children. I am very grateful to have 3 children. I spent months in hospital. Again, like Susan, you say, oh, my father was involved with radiation, and they just look at you like, you know, they don't want to know, really. They don't want to know. Nobody seems to want to know. Like Susan said, this is our family. And when you listen to other people, you talk to other people, and they say, oh yeah, I've had teeth problems, or I've got this, or I've got that, you know, and the sort of how it is. You've just got to listen to all the others, and the stories are really all the same.
Yeah, I think actually I can echo a lot of what these guys have said. I think, as I said initially, infertility, recurrent miscarriages, I'm extremely grateful to have my son. He has autism, and I kind of have guilt over that a little bit, wondering with what I know now about my medical problems, whether I've passed things on to him that he's now kind of taking forward. My first kind of hint that anything could be related to Christmas Island was actually when I was pregnant with my son. I was called in to see consultants and have extra scans, and they actually said it was because of the nuclear history. I wish I'd asked more at the time, but I was probably a little bit naive and a little bit scared about what this meant for my baby. I went for the scans, and they did lots of measurements, and I had my son, and then they never came back with anything more. I never heard a thing. I have various autoimmune problems. I have skin issues, vitiligo. I also tend to have weird kind of tumour things sort of growing that regularly need removing, and they're usually on the inside of my pelvis. My autonomic nervous system doesn't work properly. I have a connective tissue disorder. The list kind of goes on. It's one of those things where when I go into hospital they say, you're the interesting case, which is usually code for, oh God, we don't know what's wrong or why. The other thing I hear a lot is, actually we've never seen this in someone as young as you, which is never very reassuring. I had heart problems from the age of 14. I had an arrhythmia problem that is normally seen in people sort of in their 70s plus, and I was 14. So it's been quite a lonely journey, because until I found these guys, and we all kind of have this common thread, and we can share and talk and help each other out. But like the heart thing, you know, there wasn't anyone of my age group that I could confide in and talk to and go, well, actually, at this stage in my life, you know, like when I was having my son, how does it affect you? Because they were in their 70s, so they'd already kind of done all that. So, yeah, I think finding out what is an effect and why and what can be done, and just knowing what to expect maybe from the future a little bit. But, and someone taking ownership would be really good.
Yeah.
Just for them to kind of hold their hands up and go, actually, yeah, you know, there's too much of a common thread here. Okay, yeah, that's due to that. Yeah, so that's kind of it.
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone that's been so open, so honest. It's such a difficult thing for people to talk about. I can't imagine. And one of the things, before I move on to anyone else, is to, I remember when I was talking to my constituents in Salford who didn't want to be named, they had various people in their family who were affected by different things, like howling things. One particular member of the family couldn't have children, another particular member of the family had all different types of cancers, but they didn't want to talk about it in public because, one, they didn't want the stigma of being the family, like, oh, they're the nuclear testing veteran family, they've probably all got something wrong with them. And then the second thing was that they weren't entirely sure that everything that was happening to them was linked to that, when you could see, you know, me looking from the outside, and it was quite clear. It's like the whole family's affected in some way, and that's why we need to talk about this very openly. Steve, anybody else like to come in?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, deliberately, you can see there's an issue. and it is undiagnosed. Apparently there's 200 forms of short stature. I fit none of them. I have had a close diagnosis, but they said, there's this type of short stature, but you're not it. You're unique, you're a one-off. So that in itself is interesting. I've got a number of other conditions, but I am me, nothing's going to change. Doesn't matter what compensation or anything, my life is what it is. I think where I campaign is, last year, well, I always swore I'd never have children. I said, I'm not passing on the genetic damage that I have inside me onto another child. It's not fair. But then a few years later, I met a wonderful lady, and she wanted a child, and deep down, I have always wanted a child. So we decided, we discussed the risks, and thought, yeah, let's have a child, and we did. And while it was, I guess, was it the right thing to do? I think it was in the end, but there'll always be a part of me that thinks, was I playing Russian roulette with a child's life? And that's not an easy thing to do, and not an easy thing to live with as a father. My son Sasha was born 9 months ago, and thankfully, he is absolutely perfect. He's a lovely little boy, very healthy, very happy, very smiling. But that's not where it ends. Apart from every time, because one of the conditions I have as a child was hydrocephalus, which gives you incredibly painful headaches until it's diagnosed. So of course, to have a baby who is crying, I suppose most parents would think, oh, maybe somebody baby's tired, but because it's me, the first thing I think of, oh my God, he might have hydrocephalus. And I'm thinking that's that surgery he needs, he's going to have, he must be in excruciating pain. And everything he does, every movement he does, or whatever, I'm kind of looking, thinking, always trying to look for something not quite right. I think it was amazing that he was born so perfect. Because during the scans, I was always looking and asking the radiographer, are his limbs right, mate? Are you sure? And he was. So, for me, it's still not the end of the story, because he's only 9 months old. What's his future got in store for him? Is he going to get cancer at 5? Is he going to get tumours in puberty? Is he going to get any number of illnesses? And if he does, I want the medical profession to be there as his backup. He can go to the doctor and say, my grandfather served Marilyn with nuclear tests. I have a lump, I have this, and they'll go, right, we need to do X, Y, Z. There needs to be this medical process in place to help these children, and these grandchildren, and generations that will come after them. Because this isn't a scaling down problem, it's a scaling up problem. This is only going to get worse, there's going to be more children involved. And so, it's very easy to say, there's a small number of veterans. It's not a massive problem. But it is, and it's getting bigger. And this is why it can't be ignored. This is why we need the recognition. It's the first step to getting the research done, getting the medical institutions involved, and getting government to back the health resources that we need. And that is really why I do this. And that's why I'll always do it.
Brilliant, thanks Dee. I think we're all behind you there, we all agree with that. Suzanne?
I have multiple illnesses. I started with quite a rare form of Brit asthma, which even surprised my consultant in London when I collapsed in front of him at an appointment. That has been treated reasonably well, but there are still complications with it and a lot of medications. I have 2 autoimmune diseases, one of which is antiphospholipid syndrome and one of which is lupus. As a sideline, I have a damaged right tricuspid valve in my heart, which gives irregular blood flow through my heart and often creates problems with the rhythm in my heart. And I have to take medication to try to settle that down when it happens. These are like daily events, they're not freak at all. I had ovarian cancer as well, but fortunately I had my 2 children Fortunately, unfortunately, depends how you look at it, I have two fantastic daughters. I have Charlotte, who is, I feel frustrated for her, diagnosed with autism and Asperger's, anxiety and depression, which are demons that she has to fight, and they are a fight for her. And then I have Emily, who is the other extreme, and doing really successfully at her career in London, getting married soon, and all's really well, touch wood, to date. Recently I had a little blotch come up because they were looking for gallstones, and I didn't understand this sonographer asked me to move to one side, then back, then over and back. And he said, I'm not supposed to tell you, I was supposed to wait for the doctor, but I feel I need to tell you, your liver is dying. I said, what do you mean? My liver's dying? He said, yes, your liver's dying, and your left lung is badly damaged, and that will be going over to Papworth, so that they know I'm treated either at Papworth, Adam Brooks, or Guy's and St Thomas's. I am fortunate with that medical backup. But the other thing that is interesting is English, white British, you should have lupus, then antiphospholipid syndrome. Black African or Caribbean, you have it the other way around, like antiphospholipid and then lupus. And for a long while, everybody said I must have some Afro-Caribbean in my background. Well, I don't think so. Certainly no trace of it that I know of. And that is a freak. They don't understand that, and for a long while they found it very difficult to treat. To be fair, the antiphospholipid syndrome, I don't know if anybody knows what it is, but it is a clotting mechanism problem, and I throw clots quite quickly, and I have only got, basically now, because of what the sonographer said, a functioning right lung. I was asked by the doctor when he got the sonographer's report, he did a telephone appointment, and he said to me, so is there anything that's really important to you this year? And I said, here. I said, frozen, because I'm taking my daughter Charlotte for her 30th birthday. I'm pampering her in London. And the 11th of June, because that's when my other daughter is getting married. And I'm going to be there. I'm going to walk down the aisle with her. She hasn't got a father. And I will be there for her, and I'll make a speech for her at her wedding. We bought the very best we can afford for her. And I will be there. Come what may. But that is what the doctor said to me probably a week, 10 days ago. So it's been quite a difficult journey to travel, and quite lonely, because I have a burden for Charlotte. Charlotte is brilliant. She's so intelligent. She's got her masters and her ordinary degrees. She runs her own small holding. She's got an associateship with the Royal Photographic Society. And then I've given her autism. Great. Just thought I'd put that on you, Charlotte. And now she has to put up with the fact I have to have 24-hour care. Because I stop breathing in the night, I've got to get checked on. And it's no life for my Charlotte. I'm just so pleased that Emily's looking to be normal and being successful. But I will prepare for this because my father suffered mentally immensely, I think, because he could never talk about it. When I got his service record, most of it was black felt tip, but there was one bit, they wanted him to stay in the army, and he would have a good career if he stayed. And I learned that he was fluent in French, which I didn't have a clue on at all. But he clearly made it known that he didn't wish to stay in the army. He was a Royal Engineer. So I think he was aware a little bit more about what was going on. But we were never allowed to talk about it, never. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Susan. I think if you weren't brought to tears by that, then there's something wrong with you, and you will be at the wedding, large as life, I know you will. And don't ever blame yourself for what has happened. It's not your fault. And the whole point of I'm getting angry now, the whole point of this campaign is because the government has to take responsibility for what happened in those nuclear tests. You are not responsible for this, Suzanne. You've given your children love, and you've got two amazing children who are special both in their own individual ways, who are going to have bright futures. Well, you're not going to be leaving them anytime soon. You just keep fighting, and we're all behind you. And your honesty today, it's beautiful. It really is. Thank you, Suzanne. Moving on. One of the things that I remember talking to some of my constituents about is that even if they didn't have stories in their families of, suffering or medical issues, it was constantly hanging above their head that something might happen in the future. They could never shake off that fear, and hopefully that's something that our next speakers might be able to tell us a little bit more about. So, Laura, Liz, Anne, is there anything that you'd like to say?
Liz, that was difficult to hear. Quite an emotional day for everybody today. I hear my dad going around the room telling everyone how my daughter's a world champion. So I'm fit as a fiddle, okay? Well, it didn't start like that. When I was born in 1963, obviously, as I started to walk and talk, I had very poor eyesight. In fact, my brothers, people around me, well, not my brothers, but my family around used to laugh about how I used to walk into things because I used to have my eyes patched. Used to say one eye on, one eye away, but isn't it strange that, other descendants share the same issue? Obviously, I had my eyes patched, and before really going to school, 2.5 years old, I was wearing glasses, and they never sorted it out. I'm actually almost blind in the right eye. Something that I had to hide as a boxer. Well, so we've never been able to take part in the sport. But yeah, so I just adapted like we all do. Other things that have come to light, things like eczema in your ears. I mean, most people talk about eczema on the outside, but I have eczema inside my ears, so I'm meant to wear hearing aids, but I'm a bit proud, don't like to kind of show that weakness, as you say. The other thing that occurs, we talked about autism. I've always been known for not being able to keep still, sit down, but maybe I'm just undiagnosed as having ADHD or something, who knows. We talk about our stories that as fathers, you know, went through Christmas Island and some of the things he suffered. But as a child, I feel terrible about it now, and say that I was kind of a bit disattached from my dad. You wouldn't believe that now, but as a child I wouldn't touch him because he had scars around his body. You know, I suppose he had PTSD, and you know, he wasn't as, you know, as able really to express as he should have done perhaps then. But now all the dots being put back in place now, as we all talk, we all share our stories, and a lot of them are in common as well. So I haven't had any children, I'll be honest. I'm terrified I was terrified of having children. I didn't learn this from my dad. I learned it from when I was in Nevada, when I was around 30. Just in a general discussion about my dad being a test veteran, and I was being told, oh, they all get cancer and they all die, and all the kids are born all funny, and but I didn't realise until much later how it's really affected our families, really. But today, when the veterans were asked, put your hand up if you've lost a child, I burst into tears at that table there, because in a way, how am I really to so many people? I haven't been able to have children, so I'm grateful for that. But there's one thing it's done today. It's made me quite angry in a way. I was angry before, but I'm even more like angry now. Not angry, what's the word? Cheated, really. Our fathers have been treated like guinea pigs.
Thanks, Anne.
I'm humbled to sit on this stage with the people that have talked today. I think me and Liz will probably say we probably class ourselves as one of the lucky families in this situation. My grandpa went to Christmas Island and was part of Operation Grapple, saw 4 weapons whilst he was there, the last one being Grapple X. And I think anyone that left that island before Grapple Y is deemed to be one of the lucky people. So I think from our family's perspective, echoing what Anne said, it's the unknown, and I think, again, echoing what others have said, that research piece and understanding the potential impacts, having the ability to talk to medical professionals and understand where there might be something that needs to be done slightly differently for these families is really important. I think then in our family, it's really about what else can be done, and primarily because we're probably not impacted as significantly from the health side, but talking about things like recognition. I speak to my friends, family, people at work, and very few people understand the nuclear test, very few people talk about it. I did an A-level in history, and we did the Cold War, and we never talked about this, and it's an absolute travesty that every single student in the UK is not taught about this in our schools, and is not proud to talk about our nuclear veterans, and actually all of us in this room should be able to stand up and talk to people about that, and they should absolutely know it in the same way we know about World War I and World War II and other instances in history. So I think alongside the medical piece, the understanding and the education piece is absolutely significant. And then I think for everyone in this room, the recognition is the thing that is absolutely imperative now. As Alan said earlier, in the 17th year, there's never a better time to do it, and late is better than never. And echoing what Anne said earlier, I talk about this and I go from in waves of emotion and then complete fury in terms of the fact that I have to sit with my grandpa and he has to tell his story over and over and over again. He shouldn't have to do that. Rebecca has been fantastic, as was Charlie and the team. And when she stood up in Parliament and asked Boris Johnson to meet us, and she talked about the fact that we'd sat and I'd said, I want to go to Remembrance Sunday next year, and I want my grandpa stood there with a medal, and I want him and every single one of the comrades that he went to Christmas Island with recognised, because that is the right thing to do, and now is the right time to do it.
Yeah. She hands her the mic just as she gets all emotional. Thanks, Laura. I think, yeah, this is very humbling, and thank you for sharing your experiences. For crying out loud, this is a no-brainer. Exposure to radiation has caused significant, serious, life-affecting illnesses, diseases, and it continues. Stop telling us it doesn't. Will somebody please do the investigation? Please will somebody have a duty of care that we can look at all the evidence and stop worrying and deal with what we've got to deal with in an appropriate way, in a way that will support people who need it the most, or alleviate all of those fears and those sometimes irrational fears that we've got. This, enough is enough. There is a room full here of evidence. There is an archive full of evidence, and it's time now that we actually stopped denying it, put the effort into the right direction, and because there is not anybody who would not, you tell the story, everybody, as Laura said, you share this with your family and friends, and as soon as you say, my dad was exposed to radiation, then they take a sharp intake of breath and go, wow, there's not a person who doesn't realise that that is dangerous. The issue we've now got is that we are being criticised and demonised for asking questions. I have an older brother who didn't survive, never met him, Stephen, and we as a family have been demonised even for querying how he died. He could have died from any number of reasons, but why are we not allowed to ask? Why is nobody willing to answer these questions? And we need to now sort of challenge this, and it's really interesting what you said, Steve, about how this is growing. Brace yourselves, because exponentially now we've got people here who have the experience, who this is not ever going to go away, it's just going to get stronger and stronger. And brace yourselves, like I said, because this, we need answers. Mistakes were made, make them right. Give people recognition. Duty of care was not there, but please now, do not keep this going any longer, because there's too many people who know too much, who've got too much collective brain power and fighting them to keep this going, and enough is enough.
So, we've campaigned for a medal for our veterans, and I'm fortunate my dad's still here with us by our side. I'd like to say to all those who make the decisions about whether or not they were put in harm's way or whatever, and whenever they get over dragging their feet until it's no longer relevant, I can't pin a medal on a gravestone. Don't insult us, please. Not, you know, we're strong enough to stand together, and we're strong enough to continue fighting for justice, but please don't insult us and, you know, drag your feet until it's no longer relevant.
International speakers again. As you know, nuclear testing veterans here in the UK haven't been recognised, never mind their descendants. However, we know that that's not the case internationally. So it would be very interesting to hear from our international colleagues as to what support they have had from their governments as descendants in relation to the various difficulties they may have faced, and what support did their parents receive, particularly their parents who might have been a nuclear testing veteran. And we'll go first to Karina, if you're still there, Karina, hanging on at the God only knows what time in Australia. There'll be a place in heaven for you, that's for sure, after today.
Sorry, I had to charge my laptop, so I apologise. I've been sort of on my small screen. When the Royal Commission did take place, there were clear recommendations that came out of it. There was a form of compensation to some who were strong in the evidence and impacted by those tests. And then there were some sort of clear recommendations that came out for the Maralinga community, which is south from the Emu Fields, where they had been able to establish a trust arrangement where the Aboriginal people from the Maralinga region have small benefits to the trust. There was a clean-up that needed to happen around the ground zero area. But you know, when things are sworn to secrecy for a period of time, so 50 years here in Australia, there's very little room to be able to put something up against the government, or further compensation, or further service, or further services to the Aboriginal people. So we also lack in the research around people's health and well-being, and the research on how healthy our country is. Many of our people still continue to hunt and gather, and these foods are eating off our traditional lands, and we hunt and gather, and the research there is very limited, and so, you know, lots of those gaps in the data, which is a real concern for us, but also the fact that many people have passed, and those who were there at the time in 1953, the majority of them have passed. There's probably a handful of men and women who were there at the time. So it's a story that has a lot of gaps in it, but a lot of the oral history in the time of that Royal Commission really spoke about the instant impact that was felt by the community, and in particular my late father's community, Wallatina, who really felt the brunt of it all when the radiation fell out, and so many suffered and many people had died, and then many people generations later feeling those impacts, the cancers, the autoimmune diseases, the skin rash on the skins, the dental issues, all of those are very common within our own Aboriginal community. When you're talking about thousands and thousands of square kilometres and one patrol officer who doesn't speak Bidendera or Yambundera language, Aboriginal people were completely blindsided by the decisions of the government of the day back then. And we've received no apology from the British government or the Australian government. And so I wrote in the little chat box that there are so many common stories. What I've heard by everyone presenting there over in London are very common stories for us here in Australia and in our Aboriginal community. And that's how government tends to play it, by sort of keeping us quiet. And so it's really important that every one of us who are linking in, Kathy and Victoria and others over there in London, to continue those stories and to speak up about the impacts felt by your people, the suffering that we've all gone through, and the ongoing suffering for generations. And so, you know, no amount of dollars brings back my father's sight and brings back our loved ones who have died. And so it's important to continue to share those stories.
Thanks, Karina. And if there's one thing that you would like to see us do with the campaign next, what would that be?
I've been doing the work that I can to abolish nuclear weapons, and it's been part of the story where I've been journeying through to put an end to this, you know, supply and this threat of destruction. And we hear those stories through Habakasha, who are survivors of those tests, and also, you know, us who are descendants of and people who have been exposed to this. And so, you know, I think the big goal is to get rid of the nuclear weapons and the threat of it, and, you know, to really have a focus on people and that duty of care, as one of the speakers from London was talking about, and the responsibility, the need to care for people and the need to care for country. And that's what I'd like to see, not to be living this world of this false sense of security as these weapons are used as deterrents, but a future free of nuclear weapons and this, you know, false story. And so I hope, you know, doing parts of the little work we all pitch in and do really helps to put the pressure on the governments of the day. But it's a huge battle. We look at the global instability across the world. You know, my country, Australia, hasn't signed on the treaty yet, and that's a hard battle that we need to work on here in Australia to get Australia to sign on the treaty to ban nuclear weapons.
Thanks so much, Karina. Really appreciate all of that today. Moving on now to Kathy and Victoria. Kathy and Victoria, as you know, former President Obama formally recognised nuclear testing veterans. What additional support was given to veterans at that time by the US government? And what support was actually given to descendants, or is proposed to be given to descendants? Starting first with Kathy, if you're still there, Kathy.
Yes. As far as I know, there was put during President Obama's, at the end of his term, they put in the Veterans First Act a study to study the descendants or the offspring of toxic veterans, and included in that were irradiated veterans and their offspring. I have yet to find that program, although I've contacted senators and VAs and various toxic, I can't find the program. That was put into place. I read it in the documents. It's there in writing. I just can't find it to implement it. There's legislation going through now for the downwinders who have never been acknowledged as being fully affected, which would fall under Indigenous population. They were US citizens who were affected horribly by the nuclear fallout from New Mexico and Nevada. They've been fighting just to be acknowledged and to be allowed to file as victims of nuclear fallout. Their descendants will probably reach some sort of a care program before the descendants of the atomic veterans. As far as I know, when I wrote to President Obama, it took about a few months before I got a reply, and I got a private number with the Washington DC VA, and I handed it off to Victoria to call, and they couldn't do anything for her, which is still the case. There's nothing in place for atomic veterans descendants other than that study program. And as we all know, people have been studied to death. We need action. We don't need any more study. The studies have been done. Since 1927, it's been established that ionizing radiation affects the genetics of all living creatures. Plant, bug, every living creature on the planet has a genetic reaction to ionizing radiation. So, yeah, in the US, we haven't had any support for the offspring.
Thanks, Kathy, that's really helpful. And I'd just say that in the UK, we're in an even worse situation because we haven't even got a study going on into descendants, a formal government-backed study, which would have been the first step to at least starting to embark on a road towards making sure that descendants receive the support and kind of recognition that they deserve. Victoria, moving across to you, what would you like to see the US government do next, and where are you taking the US campaign next?
Well, God bless Kathy, she keeps all the data for us. We started Children of Atomic Veterans as a result of her outreach to Obama's going nowhere. And 3 years in, we realized a lot of the things that we wanted to do would also help the victims of ionizing radiation regardless of its source. So stillglowing.org was started because I thought I could get easier traction towards some of our goals. One, we would like to see a test kit, very much like they have for BRCA, breast cancer. We don't have to redo the science is there, we just need to get the systems in place. And we're working with a couple of different groups. We're still, struggling upstream with it because we're a little hot potato. Some companies don't want to take on, what essentially they see as the government, and we see it as, a market globally that needs help. So we are talking to a couple of different people to try and get this moved along. Kathy's working with a group right now. We're trying to get some screening done. We're going to be using the art and now the new NFT space to try and raise funds. The Marshallese and that indigenous community, I grew up knowing about them and loving them from afar. I know I have a family there. I my relationship with them now through this activism. And so one of the goals is going to be to try for these indigenous communities that may not have the funds for particular cancer scan diagnostics. We're going to try to be working with raising money through NFTs, where if you buy an NFT, it provides a scan for someone, and start trying to use and leverage this and raise awareness through the art and hit it in a way where people haven't seen it before. Put it in their face in places that I can. This is, that's my craft, and I'm 350 paintings in. I've worked in the Smithsonian prior, now the Atomic Smithsonian Museum here in the US. But it's a way to leverage and raise awareness. My family, I was told at 12 I was under a 50-year Q clearance that inherited from my dad because I was this atomic child. They had to remove his penis by the time I was 19. His story is documented. I was abandoned by our government at 21. And my story, while I thought was unique, all our stories are somewhat unique, but the thread is the same that ties them all together. And I'm so blessed for this global community because I think with all of us, we're going to be able to help raise the awareness faster. And Fortunately, I'm still here to tell some stories, so I feel on an accelerated path to try to get some of them out, because I've been given a chance to continue to do it now twice. And so that's my dedication. It's only going to go where we take it, because the governments, all of them, don't want to take it anymore.
Oh, thanks so much, Victoria. Really appreciate that. Lovely to hear from you today. Now, I know we're running out of time now, so are there any final comments our guests on the stage want to say before we go, or forever hold your peace?
I wouldn't mind saying something.
Go on then, Steve.
It's about the medal subcommittee that refused to award a medal to our veterans on the grounds that it was not, there was no risk or rigour involved. I challenge them to name one thing that is more risky than being in the vicinity of an exploding nuclear weapon. And if they are that harmless, why have them as a weapon at all? This is not a political issue, it's a moral issue. Surely, you should measure democracy and how civilized it is by the way it treats its marginalised groups. And I use that word marginalised on purpose because we have been marginalised. We've been swept under the carpet. And it's not fair, it's not right, and it's not moral. And it needs addressing. So the subcommittee needs to wake up to the ludicrous decision that they made and reconsider.
Brilliant.
We don't blame our fathers. We don't blame them at all. We're absolutely loving to bits. We blame people who are just hiding the facts.
Yeah,
As well, that the thing that scared me the most of all the problems we've had in our family is we managed to get hold of a recording that was recorded by a gentleman that was in the same tent as our own father. And I was sent this recording, which I did listen to, and you can hear the countdown to a bomb. So you listen to the countdown, then you hear the most almighty blast. Then you hear a terrible, like gush of wind, like awful, and everything in the tent is shaking. You can hear like metal tin drinking cups they would have had, or whatever. And this gentleman is recording this, remember, in this tent. And then it was only when I listened to all of this, oh my God, that's horrendous. That bomb was 14 miles away, and that was recorded from 14 miles.
Thanks, Laura.
yeah, Susan.
We've spoken today about Shirley Denson and her wonderful husband Derek. When there was a story in the Daily Mirror of the amazing Susie Boniface about Eric, and at the time I was having excruciating pain in my brain. That's the only way I can describe it. Excruciating to the point where I couldn't talk, I couldn't sit up, I couldn't sit down, I was being sick, and my doctor was really concerned. She thought I had a brain tumour. Turns out I've only got chronic migraines. This story came, I found out that I had chronic migraines when I read Eric's story. And I don't want to end up like Eric. I don't want to have to kill myself to stop the pain.
And that's funny you should say that, because my grandson, I have twin grandsons who are 7, who also have terrible eyesight, but also suffer with terrible migraines.
Thank you, everybody, for being so open and honest. And I'd say to anybody who's watching this at home, if you're not angry and emotional after hearing from this amazing group of people, then there's something wrong with you. And if you are angry, we've got to turn that anger into action. This is the next generation following on from the generation of veterans who've been campaigning for over 70 years just to be recognised. We can't let the next generation down. And I know that we've got some very feisty characters on this stage and on the internet, on the screens behind you, who aren't going to take this lying down. And we'll make sure that we keep campaigning to get the recognition and the support that so many people need. So thank you so much to everybody on the stage, and thank you so much to Victoria, Kathy and Karen for speaking to us from over the internet, ungodly hours. Thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you all in the future to take us forward on the next steps of our campaign. So a round of applause for all of our fantastic.
Thank you, Rebecca, as well. I gave you the biggest group, the biggest international people as well. So, while we get people off the stage, we're just going to close the live feed for the moment for people who are watching on Facebook, and then we're going to set up some closing remarks, and our very special guest is going to appear as well. So, just for that, for the 5 minutes.